The morning the sheriff knocked, I was in my driveway with a mug of coffee and a box of old tools thinking about whether I'd finally fixed that loose porch step. I remember the light was flat and quiet, like the town itself was holding its breath, and then two uniforms at my door made everything sharp and loud in a way that still surprises me when I think about it. They told me there'd been complaints about a disturbance at my house the night before, and I laughed nervous, because that's what you do when the world tilts, and said, "Disturbance?" I had a barbecue. That's how the whole thing started. Over a barbecue. Over a plastic pool float somebody left on the lawn. Over a little line in a rulebook that someone decided to weaponize. My name's Ethan Cole. I moved to Cedar Hollow after the funeral, because quiet felt safe, and because the house had belonged to my grandfather, and it felt wrong to let it go. I'd spent my life reading blueprints and building things, siding, decks, small honest works, and I thought, naive as it sounds, that a small town meant neighbors and barbecues and the sort of peace you can lay a plank down on and depend on. Then comes Veronica Hale. Veronica was polished, the kind of person who uses a paper clip to hold a ribbon tight. She ran the homeowners association like it was her boutique, and if you ever met her, you'd notice the precision: hair, nails, posture, the kind of precision that hides everything else. At first it was little things, an overly stern email about lawn edging, a notice tacked to my door about unapproved backyard items. She enforced rules the way some people enforce taxes, without joy, with tenacity. The pool incident: 2 rows of lounge chairs at my place, about 20 people laughing. One neighbor's Bluetooth playing an old classic was the lever she pulled. She sent a certified letter the next morning. Notice of a hearing, potential fines, suspension of community amenities. You learn a lot about who you are when you're pushed. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an activist, just a man who knew the bylaws because my grandfather loved order, but I do know how to read a contract and spot a missing comma. I read the charter twice and then again, because sometimes paperwork is where truth hides. There were clerical errors, dates that made no legal sense, signatures that didn't match, and a line tucked in the middle that said the board could suspend privileges for repeated disturbances. Repeated. The word was a stretch. I refused to sign the form. They left me to admit guilt. I wrote back, calmly, like a man who wants to be taken seriously. This is a procedural overreach. Veronica doubled down. She sent neighborhood patrols, 2 men who drive around with reflective vests, the kind of intimidation that looks like civic duty and feels like surveillance, and she started tacking violation notices to doors at dawn. My mailman even remarked she had a new assistant who really knows how to file. People began to look at me different in the grocery aisle, and that's when the isolation crawled in. But here's the thing about isolation: it sharpens alliances. When you're cut off, you start to notice the people who don't turn away. Ava Reed lived 2 doors down. She was an accountant who'd retired early and taken to tending an outrageously overgrown rose garden. She liked numbers the way some folks like crossword puzzles, methodically, lovingly. One evening, over coffee that tasted like burnt toast because I was too distracted to make it right, she slid an envelope across my kitchen table. "I don't like secrets in my neighborhood," she said, and she had 3 years of HOA financials, handed me a stack of spreadsheets and a look that said, "Do something." The numbers didn't whisper, they shouted. Budgets for road repairs that never showed up, invoices with company names I'd never heard of, checks cut to vendors that were postmarked the same day the board approved them. There was a paterna series of shell contractors, never used accounts, and a steady siphoning of community funds that, when you did the math, added up to something obscene. I'll never forget the first total Ava readout: $723,348. It felt like the house folded in on me. That money could fix the pool. It could fund the little library in the clubhouse. It could get people's roofs fixed. Instead, it was gone. So we started following the money. Not in a cinematic, convoluted way, no jumping from rooftops, but quietly. Public records requests, old receipts pulled from file cabinets, a contractor who owed a favor because my father had once fixed his fence. Tom Baxter, a retired contractor with arthritis and a conscience, handed me a ledger he'd kept because he never liked the way some work orders were filled. He said, "Ethan, I don't want trouble. I just want my name not used like a ghost." His handwriting was a map. It led us to contradictions: signed change orders with no matching work, invoices for materials that never arrived. We did what you do when the polite channels fail. We organized. I prepared a packet 2 binders thick, laid out every invoice, every misfiled check, every suspicious email where Veronica's assistant CC'd a private email that led to a real estate company. We walked door to door because people need to see paper to believe paper means something, and the faces around our coffee table changed from confusion to steady anger. The big moment came at what they call the annual meeting, the gymnasium packed, fluorescent lights humming like a jury. Veronica sat at the head table, smile locked, clutching the gavel like it was a baton of inevitability. I watched her for a long breath, thinking about my grandfather's laugh and the way he'd take a breath before telling a story. I took the microphone. "People of Cedar Hollow," I said, and then I didn't use the word accuse because I knew what that felt like. Too heavy too soon. I laid out the numbers, slide by slide: missing funds, duplicated invoices, emails where Veronica asked for expedited transfers and then called them housekeeping. The crowd shifted. A neighbor stood and said, "That's my roofing money." Another woman said, "They told me my check was for landscaping." People started comparing notes like old friends solving a puzzle. Veronica tried the playbook: shock, then charm. "This is political," she said. "Ethan's airing personal grievances." She smiled the way a person smiles when they mean business, not like hospitality. Then, someone in the back, one of the contractors we'd spoken to, stood up and said, "I never did any of this work." He spoke into a silence so thick you could hear the thermostat click. Veronica's face, for the first time, lost its polish. That's when she let slip the thing people do when they think they're cornered. They try to reshape reality. "We were doing what's best for property values," she said, and the words spilled out, raw with motive. Property values, real estate deals, a plan to rezoning a little strip of land behind the green for a boutique development. Suddenly, there was a motive that made sense. The money wasn't charity, it was leverage. The enforcement of rules wasn't about safety, it was about control. The DA showed up 2 weeks later. I remember watching Veronica walk out of a room wearing sunglasses she didn't need, and the sun was the only witness. She made one last desperate move. She'd filed complaints about my disruptive behavior with a thin, trembling hand, like a woman who believes paperwork can rebuild the world the way she wants it. But we'd preserved every emails, receipts, the ledger notes. Evidence is a blunt thing. It doesn't care about reputation. There were quieter scenes that shook me more than the meeting. The look of an older neighbor who'd been bullied into silence for years, his relief like rain. Ava squeezing my hand and saying, "You did right." Tom sitting on my porch telling me about a contractor who'd cried when he found out his name was on a check that never came. When the system worked slow and imperfect, I realized it was messy and heartbreaking and, yes, beautiful. People showed up in small ways, bringing casseroles, watching evidence notebooks like they were fragile things, sharing stories of petty injustices that suddenly looked systemic. We didn't get a perfect ending. Life's never cinematic in that way. Veronica pleaded guilty to a handful of charges, paid back a fraction of what had been taken, and was stripped of her role. The developer tucked his plans away for now, but you can't unroll every crooked paper and expect the world to set itself right. Some people still whisper in the grocery store. Some yards are still a little too tidy. But the pool was repaired, and the little library got its shelves, and a committee of ordinary neighbors, plumbers, teachers, accountants, retired cooks took over bookkeeping. We instituted audits and public meetings and rules that meant something beyond a business card. If there's a lesson I carried out of all of it, it's this. Authority without accountability is a rotted beam supporting a house that looks fine from the curb. People will let rules be wielded as a weapon if there's no one checking the hand. That's why I kept the binders, and why Ava lived 2 doors down, because neighbors matter more than bylaws when trust is on the line. The story left loose ends, the kind that keep a community talking. Some think I was a troublemaker, that I stirred dust where nothing needed stirring. Others say it took one person to shine a light and finally get folks to read the fine print. I don't know which is truer, and maybe that's the real conversation. Was it about justice or about pride? Was it about greed or about a woman who believed she was saving the neighborhood in her way? I can't fix everyone's read on what happened, and I wouldn't want to. So here's what I want to ask you, because if you've stayed with me this long, you probably have an opinion. When a rule stops protecting people and starts protecting power, what do? Do you challenge it, or do you leave and try to build something better somewhere else? Tell me in the comments, right or wrong. Justice or overreach? Where do you stand? Share if you've seen a neighborhood fight that changed the meaning of community for you, and if you think auditing your board is paranoid or overdue. Life in Cedar Hollow went on lawn mowers, birthday parties, the small wars over hedges, and there are mornings I still sip coffee in the driveway, thinking about loose porch steps. I fixed them eventually. It's honest work. It's how you show a place you care enough to stay.